People weren't just surprised when Stephen A. Smith snapped back at Chris Canty. They were genuinely unsettled, because what started as a conversation about a bad season turned into a brutal autopsy of how a dynasty collapses when complacency creeps in. This wasn't about one injury, one loss, or one unlucky year. This was about the unthinkable finally being spoken out loud on national television, that Patrick Mahomes, the face of modern NFL greatness, may have been failed by the very franchise that rode his brilliance to dominance. And when Canty flatly declared the dynasty dead and accused the Chiefs of malpractice, Stephen A. didn't just disagree or agree quietly. He challenged the framing, questioned the harshness, and then, in classic fashion, pulled the conversation into deeper, more uncomfortable territory. Because here's the part that shook people. Stephen A. didn't deny that something is fundamentally wrong in Kansas City. He denied that it's as simple as neglect or arrogance. And that distinction matters, because it forces fans to confront a far scarier possibility. What if the Chiefs didn't just take Mahomes for granted, but genuinely miscalculated how fast the rest of the league would catch up? What if greatness masked flaws for so long that nobody noticed the foundation cracking? When a team misses the playoffs for the first time in the Mahomes era, ends a decade of dominance, and watches its quarterback go down after absorbing more hits than anyone else, the debate stops being theoretical. This wasn't just Canty throwing a grenade. This was Stephen A. deciding whether to kick it back or pull the pin the rest of the way out. Here's how this story detonated. Patrick Mahomes underwent successful surgery, but that news came wrapped in disaster. The Chiefs lost to the Chargers, officially knocking Kansas City out of the playoffs for the first time since Mahomes became their quarterback. 10 straight seasons of double-digit wins ended, 9 straight AFC West titles gone. A miserable year capped by injury, embarrassment, and the sudden realization that the safety net no longer exists. Chris Canty looked at that wreckage and didn't hesitate. He said the dynasty is done. Not fading, not pausing, done. He accused the organization of taking Mahomes' greatness for granted, pointing to years of punishment, constant hits, and a supporting cast that has failed him at the worst possible times. That's when Stephen A. stepped in, not to absolve the Chiefs, but to argue that the story is more complicated, more damning in some ways, and more tragic in others. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where the biggest NFL debates get unpacked without sugarcoating, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because this conversation isn't going away. Canty's argument was ruthless and direct. Patrick Mahomes has been one of the most contacted quarterbacks in football. No one has been hit more on dropbacks over the last several years. At the same time, Chiefs receivers have led the league in drops. To Canty, that combination isn't bad luck, it's negligence. You don't expose the most valuable asset in the sport to that level of punishment and inefficiency without consequences. His language was strong for a reason. He called it malpractice. He said the franchise failed to protect Mahomes, failed to surround him properly, and failed to take responsibility while assuming he would keep saving them. And the scariest part of his take was the implication that the final weeks without Mahomes would reveal just how fragile the Chiefs really are. Stephen A. didn't reject that reality, but he pushed back on the tone. He reminded everyone of context that's easy to forget when disappointment takes over. 5 Super Bowl appearances in 6 years, 3 straight trips, back-to-back championships. This wasn't a fluke run. This was sustained excellence. And Stephen A.'s point was that some of what happened this year wasn't foreseeable in the way Canty suggested. Nobody walked into the season expecting Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and even Travis Kelce to struggle with drops the way they did. That wasn't part of the plan. That wasn't a known weakness. And when you strip that expectation away, the narrative shifts slightly. It becomes less about willful neglect and more about misjudgment colliding with a league that refuses to stand still. But even as Stephen A. defended the idea that not everything could have been anticipated, he didn't deny the end result. He agreed the dynasty is over, just not for the exact same reasons. He pointed to the AFC landscape changing, Denver rising, the Chargers improving, Jacksonville and Houston demanding attention, New England re-emerging, the margin for error shrinking. And that's where his argument became more unsettling than Canty's. Because Stephen A. suggested the Chiefs didn't fall apart solely because they ignored Mahomes' needs. They fell because everyone else got better, while Kansas City stayed too comfortable with old answers. As the conversation deepened, even the defenders of Mahomes admitted uncomfortable truths. Everyone on offense shares blame. Mahomes didn't play his best football. The receivers didn't execute. The offensive line battled injuries. The run game never materialized. And underlying all of it was a philosophy that leaned too heavily on Mahomes' improvisational brilliance. Drop back, make magic, save us. That approach works until it doesn't. And when your quarterback starts getting hit constantly, timing collapses, confidence erodes, and mistakes compound. Then came the point that hit hardest. The league has evolved. Offensive minds have caught up. Younger coordinators are maximizing talent faster, developing players more efficiently, and creating advantages that didn't exist before. Meanwhile, the Chiefs' offense, long identified with innovation and creativity, began to feel stagnant. Stephen A. and Canty both circled back to the same uncomfortable question. Where was the adjustment? Where was the response after being exposed on the biggest stage? Where was the urgency? Stephen A. called that absence criminal, and that word mattered. Not because it was defamatory, but because it reflected disbelief. After suffering a blowout loss on the grandest stage, the expectation was adaptation. Instead, the same issues lingered. Last year, the Chiefs survived by winning every close game. This year, that margin vanished. One-score games flipped from a strength to a liability. And when that happens, it forces scrutiny upward. Coaching, philosophy, leadership. That's where the conversation took its most delicate turn. Patrick Mahomes wasn't absolved completely. Canty made it clear that while Mahomes isn't to blame off the field, leadership on the field is part of the responsibility of all-time greats. Holding teammates accountable, creating urgency, embracing tension when standards slip. The Chiefs, particularly on offense, seem to lack that edge. And whether that absence traces back to personnel changes, coaching dynamics, or Mahomes himself stepping into a larger leadership role is the question hanging over Kansas City. The cap situation only added to the sense of dread.